Montana Territory, 1871. The horizon stretched endless and unforgiving as Matthew Miller's gaze swept across the vast prairie. At 25, he'd already survived more frontier hardships than most men twice his age. The setting sun cast long shadows across his handsome features. High cheekbones, strong jawline with 3 days' worth of light stubble, and eyes the color of faded denim. Those eyes had seen too much death to believe in anything but survival. A man relies on himself out here, Matthew muttered to his prized buckskin stallion. Thunder. Trust gets you killed, boy. Remember that. The horse nickered softly as they rode toward his modest homestead, a small cabin with a fledgling cattle operation that represented 4 years of backbreaking work. 4 years of solitude, broken only by infrequent supply runs to Helena and the occasional passing traveler. Matthew had left Missouri after the war with nothing but nightmares and a determination to disappear into the vastness of the frontier. Out here, a man could reinvent himself, leave the past behind. All that mattered was the next sunrise, the next meal, the next breath. Love was a luxury for soft city folk, not weathered frontiersmen. As they approached the cabin, Thunder suddenly reared, nearly throwing Matthew from the saddle. Whoa there! Matthew steadied the animal, hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver on his hip. His eyes scanned the perimeter of his property, a habit born from necessity. Nothing seemed amiss, yet Thunder remained agitated, his ears pinned back. What's got into you, boy? The horse whinnied, pawing at the ground nervously. Matthew dismounted, leading Thunder toward the stable beside his cabin. As he removed the saddle and bridle, he noticed fresh scratches along the horse's flank. Someone been bothering you? Matthew asked, running his hand along the marks. That night, as Matthew sat alone by his hearth, the silence of his cabin pressed in around him. Sometimes he imagined he could hear the loneliness, like a physical presence in the room. The dancing flames cast shadows across the rough-hewn walls, shadows that seemed to whisper, "This is all there is, all there ever will be." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of an early autumn storm. Matthew had just settled into his bunk when he heard Thunder's distressed neighing from the stable. He grabbed his rifle and rushed outside. The stable door stood wide open, swinging in the wind. Thunder was gone. Damnation! Matthew cursed, scanning the darkness. Rain had begun to fall, quickly turning from drizzle to downpour. Thunder's tracks would soon be washed away. Despite the storm, Matthew saddled his backup mount, an older mare named Penny, and set out to find his prized stallion. Thunder wasn't just transportation. He was Matthew's sole companion in this isolated life. By dawn, Matthew returned to his cabin empty-handed and soaked to the bone. Thunder had vanished completely. The loss hit harder than he expected, like losing a friend. It reinforced what he already knew. Attachment only led to pain. Shouldn't have gotten fond of that horse anyway, Matthew told himself as he hung his dripping coat by the fire. Everything leaves eventually. The next day dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had never happened. Matthew rose with the sun, preparing to ride into Helena to inquire about his missing horse. As he stepped onto his porch, rifle in hand, he froze. Thunder stood at the edge of his property, coat gleaming in the morning light. But the horse wasn't alone. Perched atop the saddle was a young woman, her black hair falling in a thick braid over one shoulder. She wore a curious blend of Apache and settler clothing, a leather skirt adorned with intricate beadwork paired with a simple cotton blouse. Her skin was the color of burnished copper, her expression wary but determined. Matthew raised his rifle instinctively, then lowered it as Thunder trotted toward him, seemingly pleased with himself. "Who are you?" Matthew called out, maintaining his distance. His eyes narrowed as he noted the woman's bloodied arm, hastily wrapped with a strip of cloth. The woman slid gracefully from Thunder's back, wincing slightly as her feet touched the ground. She stood tall despite her injury, chin raised with quiet dignity. "I am Hope Navarro," she said, her English precise and clear. "Your horse found me. I was—" She paused, choosing her words carefully, in difficulty. Hope was 20 years old, with features that blended her Apache mother's high cheekbones with her Spanish father's strong profile. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, studied Matthew with equal parts caution and curiosity. "Your horse is very loyal," she continued. "He would not leave me, even when I tried to send him back." Matthew approached slowly, taking Thunder's reins. He ran off in the storm last night. He found me 10 miles west of here. Some men were. Hope's voice hardened. They were pursuing me. Your horse appeared, and when I climbed on his back, he brought me here. What men? Matthew asked, scanning the horizon instinctively. Bounty hunters. Hope's gaze didn't waver. They believe I have information they want. Matthew felt the familiar weight of decision settle on his shoulders. The smart choice was clear. Send her on her way, avoid whatever trouble followed her. The frontier was dangerous enough without inviting more peril. That arm needs tending, he found himself saying instead, nodding toward her injury. Come inside. We'll get it cleaned up. As Hope stepped into his cabin, Matthew realized it was the first time a woman had crossed his threshold in 4 years. Her presence immediately transformed the space, making him acutely aware of the sparse furnishings, the layer of dust on the shelves, the lingering scent of coffee and leather. Sit, he instructed, gesturing to his single chair while he gathered what meager medical supplies he had. Hope obeyed, unwrapping the makeshift bandage to reveal a deep gash running from elbow to wrist. It is not as bad as it appears, she said, though the pain in her eyes suggested otherwise. How'd it happen? Matthew asked as he cleaned the wound with whiskey, noting her slight flinch, the only indication of discomfort she allowed herself. One of the men caught me with his knife as I escaped, Hope explained, watching as Matthew worked. I was careless. It will not happen again. As Matthew wrapped her arm with a clean bandage, their fingers briefly touched. He withdrew his hand quickly, unaccustomed to such contact. Why are these men after you? He asked, keeping his tone neutral. Hope studied him for a long moment before answering. My father was a trader. Before he died, he discovered a gold deposit in Apache territory. These men believe I know its location. And do you? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Would you ask if I were a man? Matthew conceded the point with a slight nod. Fair enough. What's your plan now? I was heading north, to Canada, Hope replied. But now they have my trail. I need to change direction. Matthew should have wished her luck and sent her on her way. Instead, he heard himself offering, stay the night. Rest that arm. You can leave at first light tomorrow. That evening, as they shared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Matthew found himself talking more than he had in years. Hope listened intently, asking questions about his cattle, his land, his life before Montana. She never pressed when he avoided certain topics, seeming to understand the unspoken boundaries around his past. How did you learn English so well? Matthew asked as they sat by the fire. My father insisted, Hope explained. He said knowledge of many languages would open doors for me. A shadow crossed her face. He did not anticipate that his own discoveries would put me in danger. The frontier's dangerous for everyone, Matthew replied. Man, woman, child, doesn't matter. Out here, you survive or you don't. Hope studied him thoughtfully. And is survival enough? To simply continue breathing? The question unsettled him. It's all there is. Perhaps for some, she acknowledged. But my mother's people believe life must have purpose beyond mere survival. Matthew didn't respond, but the words lingered as he prepared a bedroll for himself on the floor, offering Hope his bunk. I cannot take your bed, she protested. You can and you will, Matthew insisted. That arm needs proper rest. As they settled into the darkness, the cabin quiet except for the occasional pop from the dying fire, Matthew found himself acutely aware of her presence. It had been so long since he'd shared a space with another person. The solitude he'd cultivated now felt strangely hollow. Matthew. Hope's voice came softly through the darkness. Thank you for your kindness. He grunted in response, uncomfortable with gratitude. Just returning the favor to Thunder. He seems to think you're worth saving. Morning arrived with the sound of hoofbeats approaching the cabin. Matthew was instantly alert, rifle in hand before his feet hit the floor. Hope stood by the window, already dressed, her expression tense. 3 riders, she reported quietly. The same men who were chasing me. Matthew peered out to confirm. 3 rough-looking men approached, heavily armed and moving with purpose. They're after the gold, Hope whispered. They will kill anyone who stands in their way. Matthew knew the sensible choice was to turn her over, avoid conflict. It wasn't his fight, yet something in him rebelled at the thought. Stay inside, he instructed, checking his rifle. Matthew, stay inside, he repeated firmly, then stepped out onto his porch to meet the approaching riders. The lead man, a heavily scarred individual with cold eyes, reined in his horse a few yards from the cabin. "Morning," he called, his friendly tone belied by the tension in his posture. "I'm looking for a woman. Apache half-breed. Might have passed through here." Matthew leaned on his rifle, affecting casualness he didn't feel. "Haven't seen anyone in weeks." "What's she done?" "Thieving," the man replied smoothly. "Took something valuable from my employer. Must be important to track her all this way." "Very important." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mind if we look around? She's clever. Might be hiding." Matthew shifted his weight, bringing the rifle to a more ready position. "Actually, I do mind. This is private property." The leader exchanged glances with his companions. "Now, friend, we're just trying to recover stolen property. Don't want any trouble." "Then there won't be any," Matthew replied evenly. "Not if you ride on now." The standoff stretched for several tense heartbeats before the leader finally nodded. "We'll be moving on then. But if you do see her." He reached into his pocket and tossed a folded paper toward Matthew. "There's a reward." Matthew didn't move to pick up the paper. "I'll keep that in mind." He watched as the three men rode away, not relaxing until they disappeared from view. When he turned back to the cabin, Hope stood in the doorway, a mixture of gratitude and worry in her expression. "They will return," she said simply. "Probably," Matthew agreed, retrieving the reward notice and scanning it. $200 is a lot of money for information. Hope's face remained impassive, but her hands tightened slightly at her sides. "And is that what you want? The reward?" Matthew studied her for a long moment before deliberately tearing the paper in half. "What I want is my breakfast. Then we need to figure out your next move, because those men won't give up easily." Over the following days, a tentative trust developed between them. Hope's wound began healing, and she insisted on contributing to the daily work of the homestead. Matthew found himself impressed by her knowledge of plants, her skill with animals, and her quiet competence at tasks he'd struggled with alone. "Where did you learn to mend leather like that?" he asked as she repaired his worn saddle with expert precision. "My mother taught me," Hope replied, her nimble fingers working the awl through tough material. "Apache women are expected to be skilled at many things." "And what about Apache men? What are they expected to be?" Hope glanced up, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Brave, strong, silent." Her gaze held his. "Much like Montana cowboys, it seems." Matthew found himself smiling, a rusty, unfamiliar sensation. Maybe people aren't so different, no matter where they come from. "Maybe," Hope agreed, though some cling to differences because it makes it easier to hate what they fear. The observation hung between them as they worked in companionable silence. That evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Hope told him about her childhood, growing up between two worlds, never fully accepted by either. "My father loved my mother truly," she explained. "But even his love could not protect her from those who saw her only as a savage. And when he died last year," she trailed off, gazing at the horizon. "The Apache way is to move forward, to find strength in hardship. But sometimes I wonder if there is a place in this world where I truly belong." Matthew studied her profile against the dying light. "You've survived this long. That's more than many can say." "There is a difference between surviving and living," Hope responded softly. "You know this, I think. You survive here alone with your cattle and your silence. But are you living, Matthew Miller?" The question struck him like a physical blow. For years of solitude, of keeping the world at arm's length, for years of telling himself this emptiness was what he wanted, what he deserved. "I'm alive," he answered finally. "That's enough." Hope turned to face him fully, her expression gentle but challenging. "Is it?" Matthew stood abruptly, uncomfortable with the direction of their conversation. "I'll check the perimeter before dark." Those men could still be around. As days stretched into a week, Matthew found himself inventing reasons for Hope to stay. The arm needed more time to heal properly. The cattle drive to Helena could use an extra hand. The approaching autumn meant preparations for winter that would go faster with help. Hope accepted each excuse with a knowing look that suggested she understood what Matthew himself was reluctant to admit. He didn't want her to leave. One evening, as they worked together to repair a section of fence, Thunder galloped playfully around them, seemingly pleased to have both humans in his presence. "He brought us together," Hope observed, patting the horse's neck affectionately. Perhaps he is wiser than we know. Or just stubborn, Matthew replied, though a smile tugged at his lips. Seems to have decided you belong here. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. That night, as a late summer storm raged outside, they sat close by the fire. Matthew found himself telling Hope about the war, about the things he'd seen and done that drove him to seek isolation in Montana Territory. I came here to disappear, he admitted. Figured if I stayed alone long enough, maybe I'd outrun the memories. Hope listened without judgment, her hand eventually finding his in the firelight. My people believe that carrying burdens alone makes them heavier, and sharing them makes them lighter? Matthew asked skeptically. No, Hope replied. But sharing means you do not fall when the weight becomes too much. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a connection that transcended the short time they'd known each other. When Matthew leaned forward, Hope met him halfway, their lips finding each other in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. Just as dawn broke the following morning, the sound of approaching riders pulled them from sleep. Matthew was at the window instantly, Hope beside him. 6 men this time, he muttered grimly. They've brought reinforcements. Hope's face hardened with determination. I will not let them harm you. This is my fight, not yours. It became my fight the moment thunder brought you here, Matthew replied, checking his ammunition. We need a plan. As the riders drew closer, Matthew and Hope exchanged a look of understanding. They had discussed this possibility, had prepared for it. Matthew stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, as the group of men approached. He recognized the scarred leader from before, now flanked by 5 equally rough-looking companions. Thought we might find her here, the leader called out, his hand resting casually near his pistol. Be smart now, friend. Hand over the woman and the map, and we'll leave you in peace. There's no map, Matthew replied evenly. And the lady isn't going anywhere she doesn't choose to go. The leader spat on the ground. Playing hero for a half-breed? Didn't figure you for a fool. And I didn't figure you for a man who'd need 5 others to help him rob a woman, Matthew countered. Yet here we are. The leader's face darkened with anger. Last chance. Step aside. No, Matthew said simply. The leader reached for his gun, but before he could draw, a shot rang out from the side of the cabin. One of the riders cried out, clutching his arm as his pistol fell to the dirt. Hope emerged from around the corner, a rifle steady in her hands. The next one goes through your heart, she called to the leader. Leave now. For a tense moment, it seemed the confrontation would escalate into a full gunfight. Then, the sound of multiple riders approaching from the east caught everyone's attention. A group of 4 mounted men in cavalry uniforms appeared, led by a stern-looking officer. They rode purposefully toward the standoff, rifles at the ready. What's happening here? The officer demanded as they drew near. The leader of the bounty hunters forced a smile. Military business, Captain. Apprehending a thief. Is that so? The officer surveyed the scene skeptically. And you are? Wallace Jenkins, special agent. These men work for me. The officer dismounted, approaching Jenkins with narrowed eyes. Interesting. Because I have orders concerning a Wallace Jenkins. Wanted for impersonating government officials and murder in 3 territories. He turned to his men. Disarm them. Jenkins reached for his weapon, but froze when multiple rifles trained on him. This is a mistake, he protested as one of the soldiers relieved him of his pistol. The mistake was returning to Montana Territory after killing that family in Helena. The officer replied coldly. The father managed to describe you before he died. As the soldiers restrained Jenkins and his men, the officer approached Matthew and Hope. Captain James Marshall, Fort Shaw. We've been tracking these men for weeks. They've been terrorizing settlers and tribes alike, claiming to be government agents. Hope stepped forward. They were after my father's gold claim. They believed I had a map. Captain Marshall nodded. Jenkins has used that tactic before. Find someone with a legitimate claim, force them to sign it over, then dispose of them. He studied Hope curiously. You must be Joseph Navarro's daughter. Your father was a respected man. You knew him? Hope asked, surprise evident in her voice. Met him several times at the fort. Good man. Marshall glanced between Matthew and Hope. He filed his claim legally before he died. It's registered in your name, Miss Navarro. These men had no right to it. As the soldiers prepared to leave with their prisoners, Captain Marshall tipped his hat to Matthew. You two should come to Fort Shaw soon. There's paperwork regarding the claim that needs attention. His eyes twinkled slightly. And we have a chaplain, should you be requiring such services. After they departed, Matthew and Hope stood in stunned silence, watching as the dust settled on the trail. It's over, Hope said finally, lowering her rifle. They're gone. Matthew turned to her, suddenly uncertain. Your claim, it's yours now. You're free to go claim it, start a new life. Hope studied him for a long moment. Is that what you want? For me to leave? Matthew struggled to find words, to articulate the feelings that had grown within him over the past weeks. I want. He began, then stopped, frustrated by his own inability to express himself. Hope stepped closer, her hand finding his. For someone who believes in surviving alone, you fought very bravely for us both today. Maybe I was wrong, Matthew admitted quietly. About being alone. About what survival means. And what does it mean? Hope pressed gently. Matthew looked around at his homestead, the land he'd worked alone for 4 years. For the first time, he could envision a future beyond mere existence. Children playing in the yard, laughter filling the cabin that had known only silence. A life built together, day by day, season by season. It means finding someone worth surviving for, he said finally, meeting her gaze. Someone who makes living mean something more than just drawing breath. Hope's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. The Apache have a saying, a journey is measured in friends rather than miles. And what about a life? Matthew asked, drawing her closer. How is that measured? In love, Hope answered simply. In moments of courage and kindness and connection. Their lips met as the Montana sun reached its zenith, casting no shadows between them. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Matthew and Hope stood before the chaplain at Fort Shaw, exchanging vows that formalized what their hearts already knew. Captain Marshall served as witness, along with several of Matthew's neighboring ranchers who had come to know and respect the couple. Hope wore a dress that honored both sides of her heritage, white cotton overlaid with traditional Apache beadwork she had crafted herself. Matthew, clean-shaven and dressed in his finest clothes, could barely take his eyes off her. Never seen Miller smile so much, one neighbor whispered to another. That woman's worked a miracle on him. After the ceremony, as they rode back to their homestead, now legally registered in both their names, Hope leaned forward to pat Thunder's neck affectionately. He seems pleased with himself, she observed as the horse pranced proudly beneath them. Matthew laughed, the sound no longer foreign to his lips. He should be. Without this stubborn horse, I'd still be alone, convinced that was all I deserved. Hope turned in the saddle to face him, her eyes bright with happiness. And what do you believe now, Matthew Miller? Matthew gazed at the woman who had transformed his life, who had shown him that the frontier's harshness could be balanced by love's warmth. The woman who had proven that trust wasn't always rewarded with betrayal, that opening one's heart didn't inevitably lead to pain. I believe, he said, drawing her close for a kiss, that sometimes what looks like being lost is actually finding your way home. As their homestead came into view, expanded now with Hope's careful planning and the promise of prosperity from her father's claim, Matthew felt a profound sense of rightness settle over him. The cabin was no longer just shelter from the elements, but the heart of a home. The land was no longer merely territory to be defended, but the foundation for a future. The Montana winter would come, as it always did, with its brutal cold and unforgiving storms. But this year, for the first time, Matthew would face it not as a lone survivor, but as a man blessed with love, partnership, and purpose. Together, they would build a life that proved the frontier's greatest challenge wasn't simply staying alive, it was learning to truly live.